How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
Buckeye Talk is about to begin. Hey, 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 come on in.
Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. I'm Stephen Means and that's Stefan Krajisnik as we continue our State of the Program, State of the Room series over the next couple of weeks. We did all quarterbacks yesterday, and now we're moving on to the running back room, which a lot quieter of a offseason than last year. Stefan, actually, you weren't even here yet when all of this happened. Tony Alford starts the spring at Ohio State as its running backs coach. He had been here for almost a little over a decade at that point, maybe under a decade, but close to a decade at that point. Was here for 2 spring practices. They went on spring break, and then he wasn't the running backs coach anymore. He left for Michigan soon after that. Ryan Day does a pretty quick but expansive look around the country to find running backs coaches. He ends up stealing Carlos Lachlan away from Oregon, which created a game that we played in the summer of how many coaches played musical chairs because Tony Alford left Ohio State after a week of spring practice. And we got all the way down to like Hines Ward of all the people who had to move because Tony Alford left Ohio State. Carlos Lachlan takes over the room. He ends up having 2 1,000-yard running backs for Ohio State. That's the first time since, I think, the 2012 or 11 season that Ohio State had 2 guys with over 1,000 yards rushing. And both of those guys weren't running backs. One was a quarterback with Braxton Miller and Carlos Hyde doing it. You have to go back even further before that to have 2 running backs who did it, with Quinshon having 194 for 1,060 and 4 touchdowns, and Travion Henderson 144 carries for 1,016 yards and 10 touchdowns. That's 2,000-yard years during Travion Henderson's time here. Will Howard was also part of the run game with 105 carries, 226 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I bring that up because it's a thing I want to pose the question to Stefan too later about how this running attack might work. And along the way, Carlos Lachlan also brought in 2 top 150 running backs and Bo Jackson. His name is Lamar Bo Jackson. That dude's just born to be legendary. Whether you call him by his real name or his middle name, he's supposed to be legendary. And then Turbo Rogers, who is now on campus. He did not early enroll, but all the early enrollees got here a couple of weeks ago. So they're all on campus now. And Isaiah West, who did early enroll, but was not a participant in spring as he was rehabbing an injury from high school. To my knowledge, he is now a full participant this summer as Ohio State goes through summer workouts. What do you think, Stefan, of the way that, because this is like a reset for Ohio State's running back room, essentially in Carlos Lachlan's image, there's 2 guys in it who aren't in it because Carlos Lachlan was here. And that's James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon. Sam Williams-Dixon, who almost transferred, but decided to hop back out of the transfer portal. They committed and signed with Tony Alford still here, but they're going to play their entire careers outside of 2 practices in the spring for Carlos Lachlan. Overall evaluation of where you think this room is and how he set this room up for 2025, but also beyond, because bringing in a West Virginia transfer, CJ Donaldson, that's the only guy who isn't expected to be here for multiple years.
Yeah, this is definitely an interesting time for this room, just because, like you said, it's when's the last time Travion Henderson wasn't in this room? 2018, right? 2019. So this is going to be a new look, and it's a chance to really see, Carlos Lachlan in full form and kind of what he envisions for this room. I think we saw a room last year that he didn't put together work to his vision, and now we kind of see it in a sense of production. Maybe the goal is the same, but we get to see player development all fully his, and we get to see recruiting all fully his. So this is kind of, they handed over the keys to Carlos Locklin last year, and now it's full go. His foot is on the gas pedal, and that's what's going to be interesting about watching the way this room develops and the way it's used, just because this is his vision now. It's what he sees with this room, and combined with a year of him having worked with Ryan Day and Brian Hartline, what does that look like for the 2025 offense and beyond? Because I think we all know with Ryan Day and Hartline, you're going to have a pretty good passing attack, something that you can lean on fairly consistently because of the way you recruit, the way you call plays, the way you develop talent at quarterback and receiver. Where does running back fit into this mix? You have to imagine that Carlos Locklin is pretty confident in what that group can do in this offense. And it makes for, I guess, pretty exciting times if you're a fan of Ohio State running backs moving forward.
What did you think? And maybe I should have started with this, but what did you think of the room pre-spring versus we didn't see 15 practice. We saw some practices. We saw a spring game. We've talked with people. Guys have been able to build some buzz. Stock up, stock down. Whatever way you want to put it, there's a way you view this room when you put it together of like, okay, Carlos Locklin's got some depth in this room versus leaving the spring and thinking either Carlos Locklin's got some bodies or he's got some depth where they might play 3-4 guys.
I think the biggest change in perception or expectation that I had for this room is directly a result of CJ Donaldson. Mm-hmm. I thought that it was going to be, James Peoples controlling a good amount of the workload with CJ Donaldson being more of a short down, situational goal line back. And the way we've seen him change his body and the way we've seen him make some plays, whether it be in practice or the spring game, leads me to believe that he's a more complete back than he was when he arrived at Ohio State. So my opinion changed because new information was presented, right? I don't like what we thought of CJ Donaldson in January, I don't think was wrong. But what we saw from CJ Donaldson when we actually saw him on the field was not who he was at West Virginia. So new information was presented. I think we all changed our opinion a bit to where this can be more of a complementary tandem in the sense of the way Quinshon and Travion were, where they do some different things and Quinshon's better here and Travion's better here. But these are two guys that are pretty interchangeable and can work together to kind of take the workload off one from the other. Now, what does that workload look like? Is it 50-50 like we saw last year? Is it more 60-40, 65-35? We'll see what that looks like as the season goes on. But I think we sit here and we can say pretty confidently that if what Quinshon and Travion did is the peak of kind of Carlos Locklin's image, then James Peoples and CJ Donaldson can be a pretty good version of that. And I hesitate to say that they can do that because it takes a really good running back to run for 1,000 yards. It takes 2 day 2 NFL draft picks to each run for 1,000 yards. That's what those guys were, right? Like Quinshon Judkins was the best running back in the SEC. Travion Henderson, when healthy, I'm sure a lot of people would say he was the best running back in the Big Ten. I know there's some pretty good running backs, but you could make that case for Travion. And you took those 2 guys from the 2 best conferences in football and put them on the same team. Like, that is how impressive that is to begin with, and they used it properly. Now I think they can keep that formula of using it properly, but maybe your talent takes one step back. So maybe the numbers don't look like 1,000 and 1,000, but it can still be pretty good because this is what Carlos Locklin can do at the peak. One step down is not bad either.
The way you feel about CJ Donaldson, and I agree with you because we talked about this idea of like, hey, maybe he's the short yardage back to now he's just like part of the mix here. West Virginia in 2023, 171 carries for 798 yards and 11 touchdowns, plus 9 catches for 59 yards. In 2024, 163 carries for 734 yards, 4.5 yards per carry, 11 touchdowns, plus 14 receptions for 104 yards and 1 touchdown. In 2022, as a true freshman, for whatever reason, Football Reference has him listed as a tight end because he might have just been more of like a fullback back then. 87 carries for 526 yards and 8 touchdowns, 9 catches for 27 yards. And I think the reason they have him listed that way, he said this in the spring that he was playing some receiver at points during his high school career. I don't know if he said this to us in the media or he said this in one of those media clips Ohio State likes to put out where they're reading a topic and they're like, what would you do? The fun stuff they do on social media. And he said he was playing some wide receiver in high school. So that even ticked up my thought on him of, oh, maybe this isn't a short yardage guy. This is just the guy you pair with James Peoples. So I think that is on the table where that's just your 1-2 punch. Bo Jackson is how I feel about Bo Jackson the way you feel about TJ Donaldson, though. And this idea that maybe there's a world where there's 3. And I do think, and I'll save some of this stuff, but I do think the quarterback, and obviously this depends on who wins the job. We think it's going to be Julian Sands, so that's how we're going to talk about this thing. We're also giving a nod to Lincoln Keno's that we're not going to be shocked if Lincoln Keno wins the job. We're just not expecting that to be the case. If the guy who wins the starting quarterback job is the guy we think it's going to be, that also means we are not expecting the quarterback to be nearly as involved in the run game, which might mean there's an extra 60 to 70 carries out there for a running back to have. And I am wondering if Bo Jackson can use those carries to make this a 1-2-3 punch. When we've seen 1-2, maybe this is a 3-man job. And it's because of the way that Carlos Loughlin keeps talking about Bo Jackson.
Yeah, I think Bo Jackson is definitely in the mix as the freshman. And maybe that's part of this equation and this formula of maybe instead of replacing Quinshon and Travion with two, a 1A and a 1B, maybe there's a 1C in there. Maybe that's how you divide the workload. Maybe it is James Peoples gets 60% of the carries, but instead of 40% going to CJ Donaldson, it's 30% Donaldson and 10%, Jackson, or maybe it's closer to 20 and 20 between Donaldson and Jackson. And then you got, James Peoples carrying the rest. I think the number one thing is you can identify who the number one guy in this room is. I think we both agree that that's James Peoples. So whether he gets a lot more carries than the second best guy doesn't really matter as long as his workload is still at a reasonable threshold, right? Like it doesn't matter if he's well above CJ Donaldson in carries, if CJ Donaldson and James Peoples combined is the same as, if CJ Donaldson and Bo Jackson combined is the same as James Peoples, it all ends up being the same. James is relatively fresh, and so are these other two guys. So whatever kind of formula they try to use with however many guys they try to use, the goal is for each guy to be as fresh as possible. And if Bo Jackson enters that mix, I think that only helps all of the guys in that room.
So let's do this, because I think a lot of this pod, I would love it to be, who do you think is the best running back in the Big Ten right now, heading into the season?
I'm trying to remember the names, because the Big Ten lost a lot at running back.
Yeah.
And Haynes, I mean, probably the Big Ten, the Penn State guys did come to mind, but I'm trying to figure out like if one of them is really better than like everyone else. Like they're obviously a great tandem. I guess I would probably lean towards Singleton. I like him a little more than Allen, so maybe I would say Singleton.
But I guess this is helping because you don't sound too. I mean, they're the best by. It sounds like you're saying they're the best by default.
Yeah, I like it. The list is not overly impressive going into year. I'm sure by the time we get to December, there's going to be 2 or 3 guys, and I'm like, whoa, these guys are NFL ready. But right now, Haynes at Michigan is probably one of your 4 or 5 best in the Big Ten, and he's not particularly proven either.
So the reason I'm asking is that there is a pathway for James Peoples to be the name.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm using the Penn State game as the gauge because it's the second bye week and we're going to have 2 weeks to talk about it. And the other team also has 2 really good running backs. There is a world that exists where James Peoples is considered the best running back in the Big Ten by the time they play Penn State.
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable.
What did we see from him in like 55 carries? So it wasn't a lot. What did we see from him that allows us to think that not just because he's Ohio State's next starting running back, but we genuinely saw things where it felt like the only reason he's not playing more is because Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson exist?
Yeah, I think we saw a great level of explosiveness in his game. I think he's faster than maybe you would initially think when you look at him. But there's also a toughness. I think we saw some pretty good runs between the tackles for him in some of those limited reps, that he got. Every time I watched him play, it was never, oh, this guy fits right into Ohio State's system. This guy's going to do great at a program like Ohio State. Every time I watched him, I'm like, damn, this dude is fast. Damn, this dude's explosive. Damn, this dude is tough. There were times last year when we saw him come in, and even if it was in garbage time, where we kind of sit there and think to ourselves, like, how many Big Ten teams would he start on? Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that Big Ten doesn't have good running back play. I think the conversation, like when we say like Mylan Graham, like where would he start? I think that's a whole different thing because Big Ten receiver recruiting hasn't always been the best. But at running back, I think we genuinely saw it and we were like, if this guy didn't have 2 All-Americans running in front of him, he'd still be pretty good. And I think we kind of saw him even get better as the season went on. Like there were some games, I think it was maybe the Purdue game where we got to see him a good bit. And we were kind of sitting there thinking to ourselves like, whoa, this guy looks pretty good compared to when we saw him even in August. Like you could see with some of the later games that what was happening behind the scenes was pretty good. It was actually the Northwestern game. He had 4 runs for 25 yards. And we're talking 6.5 yards per carry. Like he looked pretty good as the season went on. And I think that's what gives me confidence is that, sure, there's a lot of great running backs that come through Ohio State, and maybe he's just the next one in a list because this offense is built in a way where running backs can succeed, but he's also pretty darn good.
Okay, let's take a break. I agree. I think I came into last year saying that James Peoples' job this year is to show everybody that it's going to be okay when he leaves. I think CJ Donaldson's arrival, I think, helps emphasize that because it's not going to all be about James Peoples. We're not going to go back to a world of you got one workhorse and then a bunch of just kind of spellbacks. I think adding CJ Donaldson, getting the 3 guys in the recruiting class, I don't think that's an indicator of what Carlos Lockman wants to do. We kind of have to do that because we kind of dropped the ball on some recruiting classes with not getting 2 in classes we were supposed to get 2 because one guy flipped to Miami, not getting a single running back in 2023. Like, we have to get the room back to where it's supposed to be numbers wise. But going and adding a guy to the room to be a co-starter with the guy who came into 2024 understanding this was a learn year in 2025, it's my room, that tells me more about what Carlos Lockman wants to do in the future. And it's a lot like what they did in 2024. And we can break that down when we come back from the break here on Buckeye Talk.
The Disney Plus Hulu Max bundle. It's the ultimate bundle for an unbelievable price. Plans starting at $16.99 a month. Get it and watch Marvel Television's Ironheart on Disney Plus.
I want to build something iconic.
A new season of The Bear on Hulu.
We can make people happy.
And The Epic, a Minecraft movie on Max.
Anything you can imagine is possible.
The Disney Plus Hulu Max bundle. Plans starting at $16.99 a month. All these and more streaming soon. Terms apply. Visit DisneyPlusHuluMaxBundle.com for details.
New Vitamin Water Zero Sugar Pineapple Passion Fruit is packed with vitamins. Just like the amount of peas we packed in that sentence. It's packed like your tote bag. The one you stole from your ex. Or your overpriced half a studio apartment. Or extra rushed rush hour traffic. Packed like your calendar. Triple booked at 5, of course. Grab a vitamin water. Did we mention it's packed with vitamins?
Back here on Buckeye Talk, Stephen Means, Stefan Krajisnik. This is our State of the Program series. I feel like we're doing a lot of series this offseason. But you can listen, you gotta do stuff to get through it. You gotta get through it, man. We're a month and a half away from Ohio State playing Texas at this point. Maybe a little bit more, but almost a month and a half away from Ohio State playing Texas. We got to get through it. We're talking about the running back room right now. So I have the numbers of every single top 2 running back pairing since Ryan Day got here in 2017 as an offensive coordinator. And there are 3 years where there's a legitimate 1-2 punch. Whether they wanted it to be or not, there was a 3-year period where there was a legitimately, we're playing 2 guys. And then there was some years when it was like, no, this is our guy. He's going to get the ball. And then there are some years where injuries created a world where they were just kind of patching it together. In 2017, they had a legitimate kind of 1-2 punch. J.K. Dobbins, 194 carries for 1,403 yards and 7 touchdowns. The number 2 guy that year was Mike Weber with 101 carries, 126 yards, and 10 touchdowns. That's a 1-2 punch. In 2018, J.K. Dobbins went up to 230 carries for 1,053 yards and 10 touchdowns. Mike Weber had 172 carries for 954 yards and 5 touchdowns. That's a 1-2 punch. J.K. hated the 1-2 punch, but he was a part of a 1-2 punch. In 2019, J.K. got the ball. 101 carries for 2,003 yards and 21 touchdowns. Because Ohio State was blowing everybody out, Master Teague also got the ball, but a lot of his carries were garbage time carries. But when you get so many garbage time carries because you're blowing everybody out, he got enough garbage time carries to have a quality enough season that he was third team All Big Ten in 2019. He had 135 carries for 779 yards and 4 touchdowns. Because they were running the clock out. And he's just like, you know what, fine. I'm just going to average 6 yards a carry. But that's we have a dude and we have a spellback. In 2020, it was kind of a little bit of everything. There were times when it was a 1-2 punch. And then Master T got going, and so it turned into Master T's the dude, and Trey Sermon's the backup. And then it flipped on its head, and Trey Sermon became the dude, and Master T was the backup. It was a little bit of everything. 16 carries for 870 yards and 4 touchdowns for Trey Sermon as the Oklahoma transfer. Master T as a number 2, 104 carries for 514 yards and 5 touchdowns. 21, they slow played TreVeyon Henderson for 3 weeks, and then it was his job. 183 carries for 1,248 yards and 15 touchdowns. Mayan Williams was number 2 with 71 carries for 508 yards and 3 touchdowns. In 2022, you've got another kind of jambalaya because TreVeyon Henderson's dealing with injuries. Mayan Williams is dealing with injuries. Like, it was to a point where it felt like they were alternating every other week who was healthy and who was not. TreVeyon wasn't healthy the entire season, but he was trying to play. So Mayan Williams ended up leading the team in rushing, 128 carries for 825 yards and 14 touchdowns. TreVeyon Henderson had 107 carries for 571 yards and 6 touchdowns. And then in 2023, TreVeyon is healthy. Mayan Williams is not healthy. So TreVeyon Henderson, 156 carries for 926 yards and 11 touchdowns, while Chit Trainum ends up being second with 85 carries for 373 yards and 3 touchdowns, which gets us to 2024 when it is a true 1-2 punch, both in approach, but also in the fact that neither one of them hated it. They both loved it. As I mentioned before, Quinshawn, 194 for 1,060 and 14 touchdowns. TreVeyon Henderson, 144 for 1,016 yards and 10 touchdowns. What are we expecting? Because barring injury, where it turns into a jambalaya like it did in 2022, are we expecting true 1-2 punch? Or are we expecting workhorse? And I want you to answer that question pre-CJ Donaldson's arrival and then after CJ Donaldson's arrival.
Pre-CJ Donaldson, you're probably leaning somewhere more toward workhorse. Something similar to maybe what we saw. It's so hard to find an example because the 2019, there was such a big separation where I don't think it's that big. Like every other year, it's pretty close. 2019 is where you have the massive separation, but I think it would have been closer to that 19 than it was last year. Yeah. I think this year I'm probably closer to, I guess, probably what you saw in 2024. I think is more of what we'll get this year. Where I'm just interested is kind of introducing a third running back. That's where 2022 is interesting to me. Is like, this happened unintentionally because there was injuries, but I think the way the numbers actually ended up being divided might be what we saw. So it's Mayan Williams, 128 carries, TreVeyon 107, Dallin Hayden 111. So I think we're more closer to that. We see something like James Peoples gets 170, CJ Donaldson gets 130, and Bo Jackson enters the mix and gets you another 70, 80, something like that. I don't, the math is escaping me a little bit right now, but I think that's kind of where you see where it's more of a 60, 30, 10% division of the carries. I think that's closer to what we are. So in a weird way, I don't think it's going to be like anything we've seen too much in the Ryan Day era, at least not intentionally. Like I said, 2022 might be your closest, but that was because of the way injuries kind of fell into place and happens. There's a chance that this year with Carlos Lachlan, we see something in terms of workload division with the running backs that's different than we've seen since Ryan Day took over.
So I'm doing some math. I'm always doing math. The averages of 1, 2, 3 amongst the running backs in terms of carry distribution is honestly what I think we're going to see this year. And this is assuming that Bo Jackson is who we think he is. Because I'm also looking at Carlos Lachlan's time at Oregon. In 2023, Bucky Irvin, as a number 1 guy, had 186 carries. Jordan James had 107. And then Jay Lamar, as a number 3, had 24 carries. So it was essentially what he had at Ohio State this past year. A 1-2 punch, and then a third guy who was more of the future guy. And then in 2022, the only other year he was there, Bucky Irvin, 156. Noah Woodington, 139, Jordan James 46, and I'll bring in why that's important that the third guy was so low in a minute when we start talking about quarterbacks, but Bo Nix was a runner. So now we're living in a world where maybe Bo Nix is not a runner. The averages of Ohio State's running backs, top 3 running backs over the last 8 years. So this is 2017 through 2024. Number 1, 159 carries a season. Number 2, 114.9 carries per season. So 115 carries per season. Number 3, 41.9, so 42 carries per season. I don't think that's off base for what this might look like. And if we want to give running back number 3 20 more carries because we don't think the quarterback is going to run it, then I would be on base with that. Because here's the quarterbacks in that span. In 2017, JT Barrett had 165 carries. That was actually the second most. And he turned it into 800 yards and 12 touchdowns. Even if you take out the sacks, he got sacked 19 times. So if you take that out, it's still 146 runs. The next year, Wayne Haskins, as not a runner in 2018, had 79 carries. And if you take out his 20 sacks, it goes down to 59 carries. In 2019, Justin Fields had 137 carries. You take out his 31 sacks, it's 106 carries. In 2020, Justin Fields had 81 carries. You take out his 21 sacks, it's 60 carries. And then you get to the age of the non-running quarterbacks for Ryan Day. CJ Stroud had 32 carries for negative 20 yards because he literally just didn't run at all. In fact, his only touchdown run came against Michigan in a much-needed touchdown scramble, but it got called back because of a holding penalty. So 32 carries for negative 20 yards. You take out his 13 sacks, you're at 19 actual runs for CJ Stroud. And then in 2022, he does run it a little bit more, 47 for 108, but you take out his 12 sacks, and now you're at 65 carries. So he actually ran the ball, actual runs in 2022, more times than Justin Fields ran it in 2020, but also Justin Fields only played 8 games in comparison to the 13 that CJ played that year. And then Kyle McCord had 32 runs for negative 65 yards. 16 of them were sacks, so he actually only ran it 16 times. And then Will Howard, 105 runs. Take out his sacks, 91 runs. So let me do the math real quick. When you take out the sacks for these quarterbacks, it's a combined 562 runs over 8 seasons. That's 70.3 runs per season. So what if we took half of that and gave it the running back 3? So what if we just give running back 3 35 more runs? So now instead of 42, he's at 77. Because there are going to be some games where Julian Sand or Lincoln Keenos is going to have to run. That's just how football works. So if we give quarterback 35 runs and we give running back 3 77 runs, while running backs 1 and 2 get 160 and 115 runs, I think that's how you get the world that Carlos Loughlin wants to live in, as running back by committee, because that's the only way you're going to get through 16 or 17 games and get to a national championship. It's the only way you can convince these running backs to come in here in tandem. And it's also a way to sell the running backs on, hey, this is a group effort because it's going to extend your NFL.
Yeah, and not only extend your NFL career, but make you better when the college football playoff rolls around. I think that's the main goal here in all of this, is to have the bodies as relatively fresh as possible. And this sets up for that. This sets up for James Peoples to have a big breakout game in the playoff because he's fresh compared to every other running back in the field or most running backs in the field. Like this is the formula Ohio State wants. And they're not even doing it like just with running backs. We saw last year just kind of slow down the offense as a whole. The receivers were relatively fresh when you got to the postseason. Like, it works for everyone. I think you see it most at running back, though. And this is kind of football now. Like, especially at the collegiate level, you're going to be hard-pressed to see the Ashton Genties of the world at the power conference level because it's going to be so hard to do that over 16 games. Say what you will about the NFL and the way guys like Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor and whoever else you want to name at running back, the way they work, the NFL relies on 2 running back systems a pretty good amount, right? The top guys get paid, but there's a lot of teams where maybe it's not the split that the Lions had with, David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, but the number 2 back gets a lot of playing time in the NFL. And I think you're seeing college take into some of that formula. And I think Ryan Day and Carlos Loughlin are kind of the leaders.
You brought up they also kind of slowed things down. Pre-injuries, it was very clear that they were going to run the ball with a sprinkle of some downfield passing because you got 3 elite receivers. But this was going to be the Quinshawn Travion show, and we've got some really good run blocking offensive linemen. Especially, they were running left a lot with Josh Simmons, Donovan Jackson, and Seth McLaughlin pre-injury. A lot of that creative stuff, the super counter stuff that we were seeing in the first couple of weeks, a lot of that was to the left side because you had those 3 guys from center to left. Do you think they can play that? Do you think they're going to try to play that slowly again this year? But also, do you think their personnel is set up for them to play that slowly this year?
I think the personnel is. I think the experience maybe isn't. There was also a level to knowing that these guys have been there, done that. You can beat these teams. You can limit the reps and just kind of get through a week. There might be more games this year where they can't kind of just play a selective way. They have to play what's going to win, and playing fast might be what wins. So I think they're going to play a little bit faster this year, but I think relatively speaking, it's not going to be what you saw pre Chip Kelly era in terms of the speed. I think it's going to be slowed down compared to that, like slowed down compared to, early Ryan Day's tenure at Ohio State. But I think it's going to have to be a little bit quicker than last year just because I think some games are going to be tighter. And I think they are at some point going to want more reps just because your quarterback's really young. Your offensive line is moving pieces around. Your running backs are young. It might benefit them more so now to get reps as opposed to just worrying about staying fresh.
I don't think they're set up to do that again this year. What you had last year was you had 2 of the 5 best running backs in college football, arguably the best offensive line in college football, pre-injury, of course. I mean, you had 2 first-round draft picks in the Remington Award winner. You also had an elite defense, like best defense in the country elite, a veteran quarterback who was a run threat, and a relatively easy schedule for the first month and a half, right? Outside of the Oregon game, the schedule before the Oregon game wasn't hard. It was Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall at Michigan State, Iowa, Oregon. So it was a good ramp-up schedule, right? You played 2 essentially preseason games, had a bye week, played a team who kind of poked some holes in you a little bit with Marshall, and then played 2 decent Big Ten teams, but not elite Big Ten teams, and then it's showtime. And then it happened again, right? You kind of, I mean, the Nebraska game was, I think that was more about them not being ready coming off of 2 weeks than it was Nebraska being good. Penn State was a tough game, and then it was kind of like spend 2 weeks figuring it out before you get Indiana and Michigan. It was last year was an ideal situation to play slower with an older roster. You can't play slow against Texas. You might lose. You can play slow against Grambling State and Ohio, but also you're probably inclined to get up big early so you can get as many people reps as possible during those 2 games. I don't think either one of us think Washington's going to be good, but that is going to be a starting quarterback's first hostile environment. And from what we hear, the fan base out in Washington is pretty awesome. And it's early enough in the season where the fan base probably hasn't checked out, so that won't be super, super easy. Minnesota, it shouldn't be hard, but it's still a Big Ten game. Illinois might be a tough game. Wisconsin's going to be at least an interesting environment, and then the back half of the schedule is the back half of the schedule. I also don't think right now I believe in this offensive line from a run blocking standpoint yet, the way I believed in it last year. I believe in them from a pass pro standpoint because, I mean, I just pointed out the numbers. Ohio State's problem hasn't been the quarterback gets sacked. The only guy since Ryan Day's been here who has been sacked more than 20 times in a single season is Justin. Like Dwayne Haskins got sacked 20 times on the dot, and Justin Fields got sacked 31 times and 21 times. But a lot of that might just be on him as much as it is on the offensive line and his ability to like hold on to the ball a bit longer at times. Younger defense that might give up some stuff, which might require your offense to score a little bit more. Younger offensive line that we're still trying to figure out what it's good at or not. 2 decent running backs, but they're not Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. We think they're good, but we don't think they're Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson yet. But you do have maybe 4 or 5 elite receivers, and your wide receivers coach is now your offensive coordinator. Because that was part of this here. Seriously, part of this is elite running backs, elite offensive line from a run blocking standpoint, elite defense, and your offensive play caller likes to run the ball. Okay? Young defense that might be elite, but hasn't gotten a lot of experience, so they might give up some stuff early. Questions on the offensive line, decent running backs, but not elite running backs, but elite receivers, and a maybe all-time great throwing quarterback. Plus a wide receivers coach as your coordinator who might want to throw the ball a little bit around. I just think they might play factor because the factors around this team might force them to play faster. And so because of that, if there was a 50-50 chance if you can throw it or run it here, I think that during the season, Chip Kelly was more likely to run it. If that same situation arises, I think Brian Hartline might be more likely to throw it.
Yeah, I mean, you're a product of your environment, and these running backs or this offensive tempo as a whole could be a product of its environment. Yeah, everything you just listed, the defense, the inexperience, the schedule, the play caller, it's all leaning towards you're going to have to pass the ball a bit more. So I think maybe one element that we don't talk about in terms of the workload, like the carries are what they are. I'm interested to see what the snap counts look like because you also lost 2 of the best pass pros at running back in the country. Like you can make the case the 2 best. I mean, Travion going into the draft, if you turn on NFL Network, like there was people gushing over his pass blocking. And we saw it rather loudly, rather emphatically sometimes I should say. Mm-hmm. So who's going to emerge as the pass blocker? If they're going to pass it a bit more, who's going to get more snaps on passing snaps? Because we haven't seen James People do a ton of that. I'm not saying that he's not going to be good, but like when we talk about everything good he did last year, we're not sitting there looking at, his pass pro snaps. We're talking about his carries in terms of the explosiveness he showed us. CJ Donaldson was a pretty big dude at West Virginia. I'm sure that he could block. I mean, like you said, they had him listed as a tight end for a year, and he was kind of a fullback. Like, I'm sure he's good at it, but we haven't seen it here at Ohio State yet. And for freshmen, that's a hard thing to learn. So that's a whole nother element in this too, where we can say what we will about the carries. Let's see what the snap counts look like, because I think that's going to be interesting as well.
Is that actually your number one question heading into fall camp, is asking Carlos Lachlan, hey, where are your running backs when it comes to pass protection?
If in terms of running backs, that's my biggest question, I think.
Yeah.
I think the biggest question is who's going to be the starting quarterback.
I know. Yeah. This is just in terms of running backs. We know what the deal is. We actually, but like in terms of running backs, when we talk to Carlos Lachlan, is that like the number one thing on your list?
I think so. Because let's be honest, if we ask him, how are you going to divide up the carries? He doesn't know the answer to that. We don't know the answer to that. That's a lot of math that no one wants to do. No. But how ready is Bo Jackson for pass pro? How much has, James Peoples developed behind the scenes at pass pro? What does CJ Donaldson look like at pass? Like, when you have a young quarterback, that's pretty important. TreVeyon Henderson picking up some blitzes in some ways saved Ohio State on some plays. And frankly, he was so good at it that he had a fake blitz pickup, and it went for 70 yards for a touchdown going into halftime.
Oh, yeah, he did. So I'm looking at CJ Donaldson's pass blocking grades last season. Overall, 41.9. He didn't give up any sacks. He did give up some pressure, 7 pressures. And this is hilarious for grading a running back on his pass blocking. But it's a valuable point. You even go back to the Michigan State game when Jeremiah caught that one-handed catch from Devin Brown. As cool as that catch was, if you go look in the backfield, you see TreVeyon Henderson putting the Michigan State defender in the dirt. So this does matter. Penn State, it was 84.4. Pittsburgh, it was 76.5. Oklahoma State, 85.5. 75.2 against Iowa State. Kansas State was 80.3. And they kind of fell off a cliff. 59.2 against Baylor. 74.4 against UCF. 10.6 against Texas Tech, which suggests he wasn't picking up blitzes very well. And then Memphis, 31.9. He also had a 15.8 against Kansas and a 29.9 against Albany. Looking at it seemed like the better the competition last year, early on in the year, he was pretty good at it. And then it just kind of fell off the cliff at the end of the season in the bowl game, as I mentioned, against Memphis. 39 offensive snaps, 5 pass blocking snaps at 31.9. That's not great, but it's a valuable thing to bring up here. We're talking a lot about how much are these guys going to get the ball? Hey, how much are you going to protect your quarterback so he can get guys the ball? Because that, more than anything, probably is what TreVeyon Henderson as an explosive back was great. Quinshon Judkins dribbling guys' heads off of the pavement was great, but both of those guys also kept Will Howard clean and made blitzes irrelevant all year.
You were talking about CJ's grades. What were the pass blocking snap counts in those, though? Because I'm sure a majority of his snaps were probably running anyways.
Yeah, of course. And 11 pass blocking against Penn State for 84.4. So these are the ones where he had at least 8.
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh, he had 16 pass blocking snaps, a 76.5, and he gave up 1 pressure. He had 8 against Kansas, gave up 3 pressures, and had a 15.8. And then not that many until Baylor, where he had 11, and he had a 59.2 pass blocking grade. And just 2 others where he had 5. Texas Tech, he had 5, gave up 2 pressures, had a 10.6, and then against Memphis, he had 5, and a grade of 31.9.
So it seems like the sample size was a little bit bigger, the grades were a little bit better.
Yeah.
So that probably, I mean, listen, if you have 2 pass blocking snaps and one of them is for a sack or pressure, your grade's not going to be very good. So that gives me a little more promise that the games where he had 8+, it seems like the law of averages kind of came into play and he was pretty decent.
And he's the older guy. So I'm not going to be shocked if the answer right now is CJ Donaldson's pretty stout at it because he's been doing it for a while James Peoples is still picking it up right now.
And also, more snaps played, more better recognition, things of that nature. I think that benefited TreVeyon as well.
Right. The problem is
Quinshon was pretty good at it too, though, which is crazy.
No, that's what I'm saying. TreVeyon was a lead at it.
Yeah.
So it took away sometimes that no, Quinshon's not giving up stuff either, man. Like those 2 violent pass blockers, violent runners as well. The problem is they don't have this year, let's figure out if it's good or not. They have you kind of need to be good at this because if not, Texas is going to be sending blitzes your way. Now, I do want, and then some of this is how Texas is going to play. Last year, they were so much zone that they didn't send a lot of blitzes. I'm wondering if they change that up this year, especially with a young quarterback. If they try to send some stuff at him early to try to get him off his rocker a little bit. Okay, Let's take our final break, and then I want to end with a conversation about J.K. Dobbins' 2,000-yard season in 2019. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but I want to have a conversation about that year and the expectations going forward for Ohio State's running back here on Buckeye Talk.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and Auto Camp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
We're back here on Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means and Stefan Krajisnik as we continue our State of the Program series. We're talking running backs today. J.K. Dobbins, 301 carries, 2,003 yards, and 21 touchdowns in 2019. If you cut that in half, it's 150 carries for 1,000 yards, 1,001 yards, and 10.5 touchdowns. So it's essentially what Quinshawn and Travion did, but in one human being. Do you think anybody ever breaks J.K. Dobbins' 2,000 rushing yard record? But also, do we think it's necessary for someone to break that that record, with the way we're talking about how Carlos Loughlin approaches his running back room, and also just where the position is today, both at the college level and the NFL?
I don't think so, at least not in the foreseeable future. The answer, I think, is no to both your questions. I don't think that record is going to be touched for a while, maybe ever, and I don't think it needs to be. When you look at the rushing numbers last season, first year of the 12-team playoff, Ashton Jeanty was his own breed, 2,600 yards, Heisman finalist, all that. Next closest was Marion Hampton at North Carolina with 1,600 yards. Like, we're talking 400 yards short of JK's record. On top of which, that's on a team that was not preparing to play 16 games, 17 games at any point, during their season outside of maybe like September. At Ohio State, a program where every year you're going to be planning on playing X amount of games, I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think it's smart to have a J.K. Dobbins type workload. Now, if injuries come into effect, maybe it's different, but I'm talking in terms of like all things fair, everything goes as planned. You're not going into a season thinking someone's running for 2,000 yards on how many carries was it? 300 something carries, right?
300.
Yeah, I just don't think you're planning on that. On top of which, this is kind of big picture, but looking at the future of college football, if the Big Ten has 4 automatic bids and you kind of have some leeway on things, and maybe non-conference games aren't as stressful and as important sometimes, like, I just don't see a world in which Ohio State has many regular season games moving forward where you're looking at a guy being like, we need to get him 30, 35 carries. Like, I just don't see a world in which that happens. The way college football is setting up right now, it's going to be similar to the NFL. I'm actually going to try to find real quick some of Saquon's numbers just to kind of see for comparison, because he's kind of he's the guy everyone, would you say he's the best running back in football?
Yeah. I mean, he's on the cover of a video game. So
that's true. And we say that about the receiver who's on the cover of the video game. Last season, he had one game where he had more than 30 carries. And that was, oddly enough, it was their second to last regular season game, because he sat out the last regular season game. So I think that was the game to like clinch the number 1 seed or whatever it was in the NFC. So it was like, all right, we got one game to, finish everything we need. And even the week before against the Commanders, he had 29 rushing yards or 29 attempts. Those were his 2 highest marks in the season. He'd only gone above 25 3 times before then. So this is basically the Eagles told you, hey, we're going to take it as easy as we can with this guy. And then when it matters, those last 2 regular season games, we're going to go big with him. So maybe we even see that this year with James Peoples, where it's like relatively easy. And then boom, against Michigan, they really want to win that game, or they need to win that game. They start to lean on him a bit more. Maybe we see him kind of get a bigger workload in that game. you're not going to see it as much in college football, I don't think, at least at the highest level, where in week 2, someone needs to run it 35 times. It's just not going to happen. And that in and of itself is going to make it very difficult for anyone to get the 2,000-yard record from J.K. Dobbins.
So in 2019, there were 4 people with 2,000 rushing yards. That 2019, like on steroids. Why was that year so awesome for college football? The 150th season of college football was awesome. Chuba Hubbard at Oklahoma State had 2,094 on 328 carries. Navy's Malcolm Perry had 2,017 on 295 carries. JK, as we mentioned, 301 carries for 2003. And Jonathan Taylor had 320 for 2000. There were also 5 other guys who had at least 1,500 yards. Jarrett Patterson at Buffalo had 1,799. A.J. Dillon at Boston College had 1,685. Travis Etienne at Clemson had 1,614. And then Javian Hawkins at Louisville had 1,525. 2020, Breece Hall at Iowa State was the only running back in the country with over 1,500 yards. He had 1,572. Now, granted, the conference most known for running the ball, the Big Ten, played significantly less football games than the rest of the country. So that's part of it, which is why like the top 5 is Iowa State, UTSA, Alabama, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, right? There are also only 14 guys that year who had over 1,000 yards. So 2021, we get back to normality. You had 5 guys with over 1,500 yards. Lou Nichols, the third at Central Michigan at 1848. Michigan State's Kenneth Walker had 1636, and he was a Heisman Trophy candidate until the Michigan State's hand to Columbus, and then that died very quickly. Tyler Algier at BYU had 1606. Tyler Batty at Missouri had 1604. Abram Smith at Baylor had 1601. And then right under 1,500 that year was Sean Tucker at Syracuse with 1,496. In 2022, you get a little deeper. You had 10 guys have at least 1,500 yards. Brad Roberts at Air Force led the country with 1,728, and Dwayne McBride joined him over 1,700 with 1,713. Other people with at least 1,500 yards that year were Marshall's Kalen Laborn, Ball State's Carson Steele, Kansas State's Deuce Vaughn, Ole Miss's Quinshawn Judkins, Texas's Bijan Robinson, Tulane's Tajay Spears, Illinois's Chase Brown, and Minnesota's Muhammad Ibrahim. In 2023, you had 5 guys with at least 1,500 yards. Ali Gordon at Oklahoma State led the country with 1,732. Amadi Vidal at Troy had 1,661. Missouri's Cody Schrader had 1,627. Texas Taj Brooks had 1,538. And then Amarion Hampton at North Carolina had 1,504. And then this year, as you already mentioned, Ashton Jeanty, with the first 2,000-yard season since 2019, with 2,601 yards, and they gave him the ball 374 times. Their offense was literally him or bust. The only other people with over 1,500 yards were Cam Skattebo with 1,711 at Arizona State, Amarion Hampton with 1,660, Bryson Daly at Army with 1,659, where they won the triple option. Jacksonville State's Trace Stewart had 1,638, UCF's RJ Harvey had 1,577, Iowa's Caleb Johnson had 1,537, and then Texas Taj Brooks had 1,505. So around the country, this is happening. We went from 2019, 4 guys had 2,000 yards to not having a 2,000-yard season until Boise State decided to give the ball to Ashton Jeanty almost 400 times. And what happened? He got to Penn State, they loaded the box, he wore down, and that was Boise State's season. So that's why you don't see running backs having 2,000 yards anymore.
That's also a conference where I think you can do it more. You can't do that in the Big Ten. You
can't do it in the Big Ten. I'm going to take this out an even further limb. And it's why I keep throwing all these numbers at people. I apologize if it feels like this is a numbers pod. Ryan Day has had one running back have over 1,500 yards. And it was when J.K. Dobbins had 2,000 in 2019. J.K. had 1,400 in 2017. And TreVeyon Henderson had 1,200 in 2021. Every other running back, the 1,000-yard running backs, have been J.K. being 53 yards over 1,000 yards in 2018. It's been Quinshawn being 60 yards over in 2024 and TreVeyon being 16 yards over in 2024. And both of them needed 16 games to get over 1,000 yards. Like, they barely got over 2,000. Carlos Lachlan, as I mentioned before, his running backs, they're not deeply over. Bucky Irving was 180 yards over 1,000 yards in 2023. And the year before that, Bucky Irving was 58 yards over 1,000. I'm going to mark down something hyperbolic. I don't think if Carlos Loughlin is here for 3 more years, he's an assistant coach. How long are we expecting assistant coaches to be here? Though Larry Johnson's been here for 15 years. If let's just say Carlos Loughlin is here 4 years total, I do not think he has a single running back over 13.
But 1,300 is even lower.
Yeah. I don't think he has a single one over 1,300 yards, unless they're averaging like 7.5 yards per carry. If they're just averaging a quality 6+ yards per carry, I don't think he has a single running back over 1,300 yards. I do think, however, every year he might have a guy with 1,100, a guy with at least 900, and a guy with at least 500 in a world where the quarterback is not a run threat. If the quarterback's a run threat, then he's only going to have 2 guys, one with 1,100, one with 900, and then the quarterback's going to have whatever, and the third guy might only have like 350 or something like that. But I think that's what the world they're going to live in now, where one guy's not going to have 2,000 yards, but 2 guys combined are.
I can definitely see that. And it makes sense when you consider last year they had 2 guys run for 1,000 yards, and that was essentially in the maximum amount of games played you could have.
I'm looking at it.
So you have to take into account Ohio State's, this is not to be a party pooper. Ohio State's not going to play 16 games every single season. They're going to lose in the quarterfinals or semifinals at some point.
I mean, yeah, of course. But it's also Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins combined for 338 carries, which is only 37 more than what J.K. Dobbins had by himself in 2019. And some of this is clock rules, right? But it's also approach. Ohio State doesn't want a workhorse anymore. I mean, I brought up Ashton Jeanty. J.K. Dobbins broke down against Clemson. He twisted his ankle, and that was it. And so it's like, all right, well, he had 301 carries, and that wasn't worth it. He broke a record, but the engine of the team broke down in the most important game of the year. I think the top 2 running backs are going to combine for 300 plus carries every single season. But you get 2 guys, so they both get to the finish line. And so Quinshon Judkins can have 3 touchdowns in a national championship game. So Travion Henderson can take a screen pass 75 yards in a semifinal game. Instead of having one guy do that for 14 weeks and expecting him to do it for 15 and 16. So I am now officially knighting J.K. Dobbins' 2,003 yards in 2019 as one of Ohio State's unbreakable records. And it is because that is no longer how Ohio State is approaching its running back position. And so the question is, if Ohio State is a running back by committee position from here on out, do we think Ohio State's 2025 committee is good enough?
I pretty firmly think the answer is yes.
That's all that matters. If we think the committee is good enough, then we'll be okay. Do we think it's going to be as good as Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson? I think they just have to prove that, because those 2 were proven commodities in the way that essentially everybody in this room is not. There's not a 1,000-yard running back in this room yet. But I agree with you. This is how they're going to do it, and we both think that they have the ability to do it because they might have 3 guys in that committee. So instead of 2 guys with 1,000, maybe you have 3 guys with 800 or something like that.
And I think if every year, or at least for the majority of years, that 3rd guy can be a freshman,
even better.
I think I'm pretty confident about the state of the room as a whole moving forward.
Even better, because then it's like a conveyor belt almost.
It's why we felt okay last year knowing that Quinshon and Travion were going to leave, because we saw James Peoples do it. And if we see Bo Jackson do it, I mean, we already talk very highly of Bo Jackson. If he is as good as a freshman as we think he can be, the glimpses that we can see and things of that nature, the workload, we're feeling pretty damn good about this room going into 2026. If James Peoples and Bo Jackson are what we think they are, and then you add on top of it, I still think Sam Williams-Dixon's pretty good.
Yeah.
Explosive. And then we're talking about a couple more freshmen. This room's in a good spot.
Yeah. Plus, Isaiah West and Turbo Rogers might be pretty good. Turbo Rogers might be a unique skill set that they use in a bunch of different ways. It seems like Carlos Loughlin is locked in on the guys he wants in his 2025 recruiting class, and things are going well, but let's see where things are after June official visits are over. But yes, I feel confident about where the room is in 2025. And I agree. The fact that part of the reason you feel confident are guys who have at least 2 more years after 2025 for how long they have to be here. And James Peoples has at least 1 more year after 2025 where he has to be here. That gives you even more confidence in where the room is in 2025 and beyond for Carlos Loughlin. Get the text 614-350-3315. Let us know how you feel about Ohio State's running back room heading into 2025, where it feels like Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson introduced a new philosophy for how Ohio State's going to attack its running back room, and now can Carlos Loughlin continue to execute that at a high level starting in 2025 against Texas on August 30th, 6-3315. That was running backs. We got receivers and tight ends and offensive line coming up. It's not just going to be me and Stefan. Stefan and Andrew are going to switch out every so often. Stefan will do wide receivers to close out this week, and then Andrew and I will talk tight ends and offensive line, and then we'll switch over to the defensive side next week. For Stefan Krajisnik, I'm Stephen Means. That was Buckeye Talk.